Part of what I'm going to talk about today is my journey a little bit. One thing I was a sprints and hurdles coach for the WA Institute of Sport, and I was there part-time. I was part-time at the Eagles, and I was head of physical education at a boys' private school in Perth, Wesley College. And part of my role with the WA Institute of Sport was that I used to take athletes away to the Northern Hemisphere in their summer and give them the opportunity, the elite ones, of either preparing for an Olympics or a Commonwealth Games, or those that hadn't quite made the standard, the opportunity to compete in some meets, to give them the chance to meet the benchmarks to enable them to be selected for their country. And on this particular occasion, we were based in Cologne in Germany, and we had a track meet in a city called Cottbus, which was in the old East Germany as it was prior to the wall coming down. It was the first time that this particular city had any Western athletes compete in it. And I don't know to this day how I was asked, but I was asked if I wouldn't mind addressing their coaches and administrators on track and field in the Western world. And I said that I would. So in preparing for it, the East Germans had no knowledge of English. They were all German speakers, and their second language was Russian. So it was necessary that I had an interpreter to do this particular presentation. So what I thought I would do would be learn the first part in German myself, welcome people, say a little bit and have a joke, lighten the mood, and then hand over to the interpreter and he could finish off what I was going to say. So I worked out what it was, and I had it written down in German on a couple of cards. So in the 2 days leading up to the presentation, I took the cards everywhere and started to learn the German side, whether I was on the trams as they were in Cottbus at the time, on the bus, at coaching, in the toilet, in my room, learned the German. So the day arrived now, and that's why I reflect on the Gold Coast. I don't know if you have an image of what it might be like to speak in East Germany when the walls had only been down for a couple of years. I certainly had an image. And it was exactly as I imagined. It was this cinder brick building with bare light bulbs hanging down and ungrated fluorescent tubes. And with great respect to any former East Germans here, the East German group of people in front of me were exactly as I imagined East German people to be that were involved in track and field, rather stern-faced and, fair to say, large. So I was introduced. I got up, and very sadly for myself, I'd forgotten to have a welcoming introduction of ladies and gentlemen. So being involved in sport and therefore thinking I was highly intelligent, I could see the signs to the ladies and gents at the back, so I just read off them. So welcome, and boom, 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 and launched into the German. I thought I spoke quite fluently, said the joke, got no laughs. There was no appreciation for my fluency in the language. I handed over to my interpreter and finished off, and to say the applause was lukewarm would be an overstatement. I was embarrassed. I'd obviously thought the interpreter had set me up, so I couldn't wait to get out, to tell you the truth. So I grabbed the bloke. As soon as I got outside, I said, "Mate, what have you done? You've set me up." And he said, "Oh, yeah, Stewart." He said, "Look, you spoke very well, but we East Germans take offence at being welcomed as water closets and urinals." So that sort of made me hark back. I'm delighted to be on the Gold Coast, and I'm delighted to be able to say, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for having us here. So I'm not a data analyst. I'm a sports scientist. I'm an exercise physiologist, and I'm the one that probably asks the questions that we require our data analysts to answer. So I need to encapsulate that from the outset. My role as high performance manager at West Coast Eagles involves overseeing 4 particular areas. We've got strength and conditioning. There is the medical area and all the medical staff that are involved. There's sports science, where we do a large amount of our data collection and data analysis. And then we also have a research arm to the club. So that's actually my role. On game day, I'm on the bench, so I'm connected to the coach, and I take messages down from the coach and ensure that they're sent out on the field. And I don't know how many people here don't follow AFL at all, like have no interest in it and don't understand it at all. Okay, that's good. So AFL's one. AFL's unique in the respect that we have runners and you can take messages out on the field, which is quite bizarre when you think about it. So the coaching still being done from the bench. And I know with John Worsfold, in tense moments, he always had a sense of humour. And when we introduced the concussion rule, there's a player called Scott Selwood who got belted behind the play and he was quite concussed. And the doctor went out to check on him, and with the new concussion rules, they had to come off the ground. He came back to me and said, "Look, you better tell the coach he's in trouble. He doesn't know who he is." So I can talk up to the coach and I say, "Look, he doesn't know who he is. He's got to come off." And Bush said, "He doesn't know who he is?" And I said, No. He said, "Well, go and tell him he's bloody Buddy Franklin and move him to full forward." So that's a bit of what happens on the bench. So that's my role. Just a little bit about how I got to this spot. So my aim today is to go back in time a little bit and work my way through my pathway at West Coast. And to do that, I just need to touch a little bit on my background because it influences a lot of what I do. So I was a track and field athlete. I was a long jumper. I was gifted by my parents with a large number of fast twitch fibres. So I was able to jump with quite good speed. At one stage, I was fortunate enough to represent Australia in the long jump and was ranked number 1 in the middle to late 70s. For the 78 Commonwealth Games, I qualified for the Commonwealth Games and came second in the trials, which I thought was good enough for selection. And I wasn't selected, and I was unbelievably destroyed by that. I mean, I genuinely felt I should have been in the team, having represented Australia before and being particularly young. And I made a decision at that point that I would up my training load. So in the middle to late 70s, there wasn't a huge amount of training, but the AIS had set the benchmark for the volume of training. So I started training twice a day. And it didn't take very long. In fact, it only took 9 months till I got a stress fracture in my navicular bone. And that was a consequence of overload. So I had my leg in plaster. The fracture didn't heal when I tried to come back, and it reopened again. So I went and had a navicular bone graft. It was the first time that was done in Western Australia. So they took bone chips from the hip, planted them in the navicular bone, got back into it, and very sadly it reopened again for a third time. And there was still a little cleft inside the navicular bone that he wasn't able to put all the grafting in. And so that required another navicular bone graft. And then when I came back, I'd lost the gift that I had. I was training more, I was stronger, I was faster, and I was jumping something like 30 centimetres less. And it struck me that I didn't have enough data. I didn't have enough information about these things. And I really needed to understand more about how I got into this position and how was I ever going to get out of it. The way I got out of it was retiring, because I didn't love the sport enough just to do it. I wanted to be successful. So I pulled the plug. And I very quickly went into coaching. So I stepped straight from track and field as an athlete and then straight into athletics as a coach. And that particular step enabled me to first start tracking athletes and first realising the importance of coaching, and I'll speak a bit about that later. But I started to have really wonderful data as a coach. Because I coached track and field, I was invited at a later stage, after a number of years of coaching, to be the strength coach at the West Coast Eagles. And that was in 1992. The Eagles had made the grand final and lost in 1991. I had a group of athletes, some who were of Olympic standard, and I thought, this is great. So my journey started in 1992 as a part-time strength coach at West Coast Eagles. So that's where I thought I'd start from. So a couple of little things about 1992, and sadly, I suspect there might be 1 or 2 people there that weren't born then. That's very unpleasant for me. But Paul Keating was the Prime Minister. The number 1 song was Achy Breaky Heart by Billy Ray Cyrus. I still know that. 1 and 2 cent coins were withdrawn from circulation, and if you didn't know what they were little brown things, for those that are very young. That was very fortunate for me, because middies at the time were 96 cents. And so therefore, after a night out, I'd go home with a complete bundle of 2 cent coins, having put dollars across and having thousands of these 2-cent coins, and thinking that the price of a mini would go down to 95, but of course it didn't. It went up to $1. So I had a cat called Minky. It's important that I raise Minky because that comes up later in my story. And I was the part-time strength coach at West Coast. So now I get into the real stuff that we're here for. West Coast at the time was a very successful club. They'd made the grand final. We had 54 players on our list, and they were all part-time. Every player was part-time. One player, Peter Sumich, his father was a market gardener, and Peter used to get up at 2 a.m. and his job was carrots, and he would pack the carrots for his father. He'd pack the carrots through till 5 o'clock in the morning, and then he'd get prepared for training, because training and weights, which I had, was 6 a.m. So we did weights from 6 till 7:30. I then went and taught, and the players went and did their work lives. Those that couldn't do weights at 6 would come back at 4 p.m. and we'd do weights in the afternoon at 4. That was pre-season. In season, the players would train 5 o'clock to 7:30, 8 o'clock, and then 54 players would do weights all together after training. And that was my group, 54 players. And Western Australia were trialling daylight saving. Mick Malthouse was the coach, and Mick had a view that you didn't stop training till it was dark. So we trained until 8:30, and so by the time I got home after weights, it was 10:30, 11 o'clock. And I thought, what the hell am I doing? This is not like track and field. The Eagles were expected to do well in 1992, and after 6 games, they were 2 wins and 4 losses, and they'd had a bad run with injury. So injury had reared its ugly head yet again. I copped an enormous amount of flack. I'd replaced a strength coach that had done a good job and got him into 91. He was able to get to the media a bit and was able to point the blame at me. So I got up one morning, it was back page of the West Australian, comments about the strength coach causing the injuries. The Eagles are 2 and 4. They're in deep trouble. What are they doing? I wanted to get on the media and refute it, but the club said, no, pull your head in. So it was an interesting time, because this never happened in track and field, because track and field was this big. And here's this big bloody thing called AFL, or VFL as it was, and I was in the middle of it. We had 6 people full-time in the footy department. We had 2 administrators, 2 coaches, and 2 recruiters, and then a host of part-time staff. And then, bloody hell, we went on and won the flag. It was great. I mean, I couldn't wait to ring up the radio and say, actually, we won the flag. What a great strength coach. It was good because Mick Malthouse had a view that the players had to be big. That was the way he wanted to play footy. And they were big, and I was given licence to develop them as much as they can. There was nothing called functional movement. There was no athletic training. This was squat, bench and cleans, let me tell you, and a bit of arm weights, so that when they went out there, they looked big. As long as they kept looking big, I was probably going to keep my job. So a very important thing, understanding that. An example of data at the time was all the weights programs were generic. So 54 guys all had basically the same weights program, which was really easy to do. They did weights 3 times a week. Hardly any other club touched weights, so we always were good. It was always put down to the strength coach. It was just that we did more weights than other clubs. I put all the weights into Excel spreadsheets. The game stats were all recorded by hand. We had 8 analysts at every game, and they sat in a separate box with a sheet of paper, and they go kick, mark, tackle, handball, and it was all collected that way. And then all our games were broadcast, or we recorded straight from the TV broadcast and put on VHS. So we had tons and tons of VHS. Because we had 2 recruiting guys, we had tons and tons of VHS stuff on other recruiting guys. So this is this beautiful mathematical weights program that I had. It was all symmetrical. It was really nicely aligned. Everything went in 15s, 12s and 10s. This is for a first-year player. Hit them with volume. Just get out there and do it, son. And that's what it looked like. That's actually from 1992. And this was the data we recorded. These are the bench press max from a group of players in 1992. 91, 92. There's a couple of names there that people might know if they follow football. Glenn Jakovic, who played with us. Dean Kemp, one of the most gifted players you'll see. Chris Lewis, who was the first AFL player to bite an opposition player. And the late Chris Mainwaring, who was a wonderfully gifted player and as tough as nails, and very sadly passed away from a drug overdose a few years ago. So that was it. From a sports science perspective, that was data, and that's how we manage stuff. So in 1997, we had a change of government, a change of Prime Minister. The Thredbo landslide was probably the major news item, and the saving of Stewart Diver. Some of you will remember that. Candle in the Wind by Elton John. I still had Minky, which was a great thing. And the AFL started moving to full-time. And so I was invited to go full-time. They didn't want the players training at 6 a.m. And 4 p.m. and it was important that we had full-time staff to go that way. So I was a phys ed teacher. I was head of phys ed, and I'm weighing it up. Do I stay with the security of a teaching job and know that I could work my way through the system, or do I have a punt and go full-time in the AFL? And I took the punt because I thought, look, I'm going to get sacked in 3 or 4 years. It's enough time, I can go back teaching. Everyone gets sacked in footy. Everyone. You get sacked. I've been lucky, not yet, but one day it could still happen. You're just going to get sacked. For no reason sometimes. You just get sacked. So I thought, I'm going to get sacked, but I can go back teaching. I had a plan B, so I took it on full time. Because we went full time, the clubs had to shed a large number of players off the list because they couldn't pay them. So we went from 54 players to 42. Nick Malthouse was still the coach, and we now had 8 full-time people in the footy department. We added the 2 extra people. We added 1 full-time medical person and 1 full-time coach. So that was the 8 people, and then there was myself in there as well. So our game vision and the way we operated had changed with us going full-time. So we still recorded from broadcast, but we got rid of VHS. We had it all recorded on DVD. And the company involved at the time was a company called Prowess Sports, and they had a product called StatsMaster. And a lot of the stats was collected back room. So we would record the vision, put it on DVD. We still had our sports statisticians doing things handheld, but then we just used the backroom vision to check on it all. But because of that, we needed part-time staff to work all day Sunday and all day Monday to record all the data. And sometimes these guys were going up until midnight to have the data ready for player reviews on Tuesday, because remember, the players are now full-time. So everyone went full-time, but we didn't adjust the infrastructure to go full-time. So it was very demanding on part-time staff. We still stored everything in Excel spreadsheets, and the data was increased enormously because players were full-time. So this is what the backroom operation looked like for StatsMaster, for Prowess Sports, these wonderful setups here. So we would record the vision. The vision would run through a couple of TVs here, DVDs. The staff member would sit and watch the vision. They would then code kick, mark, handball in the forward 50, kick, mark, handball in the defensive 50, kick, mark, handball midfield, turnover, long kick, short kick, possession regained, and so on. They would do all of that. They would go into this particular StatsMaster system, and that was our data. And it was a big job. It was a bloody big job. And that was the setup. We had stuff everywhere, and everything was covered. Down here is a wonderful thing called a modem, which was just starting to be used, and that took us nearly a year to work out what the hell that was. And everything was cabled, everything was in this old style, and these were critical, these DVDs. They'd get lost and scratched. We never had backup copies. The player would sit down and we couldn't find it. So imagine we had, 44 players on the list, 22 games. They all had a DVD. for every game, and the DVD storage. Then we had all the opposition teams and players from the opposition team. So it wasn't collecting the data, it was bloody storage that was the problem. So that was 1997. So 2001, just a little update on what things were in 2001. We had 44 on our list, but between 1997 and 2001, we'd added 11 more full-time staff in the football department, because we suddenly realised, being full-time as we did in 97, that we were understaffed to manage it. So there was an explosion of staff as well. So now the expenditure in football clubs jumped through the roof. Mick Moldhouse had left. He'd had a wonderful period of time at West Coast. He'd started in 1990 and he finished up in 1999. And in that time, the Eagles played every year in the finals. They played in 3 grand finals and won 2 premierships during his tenure. That's a magnificent record for a club that had only been in the system 3 years when he took over. And he was a wonderful coach, and I'm always thankful that he gave me a chance of being involved. And I'm a great believer because of that. I give people a chance. And later on, when I talk about our department now, I give young people a real good chance of coming in and getting a job at the West Coast. You don't have to be the most experienced person in the world, but you have to be a good person. If you've read the book Good to Great by Jim Collins, talking about some of the best companies in the world and what makes them great, one of his comments is, get great people and stick them on the bus and make sure they all know the bus is going in the same direction. And it's a philosophy that I've always lived by, and I've always been thankful for Mick because he gave us a chance at doing that. So 2001, one thing Ken did, because he came from the Hawthorn Footy Club, was he dragged us into a more updated sports science mode. You have to understand, there are representatives here from teams in Western Australia. Okay. We're isolated, and we have one morning newspaper, and we read a lot about ourselves. And with only a couple of AFL teams, most of the stuff is about us. And for a while there, we thought we were trucking along nicely. So when we had Ken come in, he said, boys, you're so far behind the Victorian clubs, you need to update your sports science. Not in so many words as that, but that was the general respect that he got across. So we introduced heart rate monitors. We'd used them a little bit, but now we did everything with heart rates. Every single piece of data was related to our heart rate measurements. So we collected tons and tons and tons of heart rate. And of course, for those that are sports scientists, they'll know that heart rates are affected by heat, caffeine, stress, lack of sleep, etc., etc. So we got some real wildly different things in trying to convince the coach that, this is not quite accurate, but because they were heart rates, this said everything. Most of our stuff was still collected in spreadsheets, but we discovered this really wonderful new software package called PowerPoint. And PowerPoint enabled us to be able to present things in a really ritzy way, which added to the sports science department. So this is what the heart rate stuff used to look like. So this is taken from a training session. You can see here, the guy's name is Mark Miranda. It was in 2001. So for every training session, we would have all their heart rate data, with the red dots being the start and finish of drills. And we had to try and collate that for the 46 players on the list for every training session. So you can imagine the hours that went into it. This was the team training session. So, above 85% of max heart rate. This was a target zone, and this was below it. And this was a sample of 5 or 6 players to see whether we could get the data or get training how we wanted it. How was it going to be? So that took ages to do. And then I know I used to present to Kenny Judge what our players, what each individual player looked like. So we then had to break down every player and do individual heart rates for 44 players for every training session, 3 training sessions a week for 10 months of the year. It was really time consuming. So we'd gone back to where we once were, which was spending an enormous amount of time collecting data. And I say to you, what did it all mean? What the hell was all of this? I could have stood on the side of the oval and said, he's not running and he is. But we needed this to support our view. Because coaches are really different. They don't always look at science. They look at what we call PPK. They have personal practical knowledge. And if you don't give them data, you'll head down a path that suits their personal practical knowledge, their PPK. And when I speak right at the finish about the way I see the future, there's a bit to do with that. I was so pleased to see the end of heart rates. So 2006, I have no idea what the prayer was by Anthony Kalia. No idea. I don't think I could hum it. So 2006, very sadly, Steve Irwin and Peter Brock passed away. Minky was still trucking along, and I knew that my passwords were still secure. And we now had 46 players on the list, and now we had 25 full-time staff. So we'd gone up another 6 in full-time staff in 2006. John Worsfold was the coach, and again, a guy that had had a magnificent career as a footballer. He was tough as nails. He suffered very, very, very badly from white line fever. So the guy to the side of the field was the most wonderful bloke you've ever met. He was naturally an introvert. He's very quiet. He liked email. He would read email. He would respond. He was a thinker. He had a degree. He was a pharmacist. And he was a coach. A very different bloke. He had a view that he had a role to play as a footballer. And his role was to terrorise the opposition for the rest of his team as captain. And the other players used to hate him because as he'd run to his position, he'd run by an opposition player. And his teammates playing on him, and he'd run over and say, he's going to kill you today. He is absolutely going to kill you. He's going to do so much damage to your body, you've got no idea. And then he'd trot off to his player. And so his poor teammates left there having to deal with this bloke who's going to kill him back. So that's what John Worsfold was like. But as a coach, he was a deep thinker, and he added a whole new realm to coaching. And one of the things that he did off the field in this time was he started to put in place processes about education, how to be educated. What does a high-performance learning environment look like? What's the best way to maximise the potential of the players? And we did a lot of work sourcing what that looked like. And my role changed from sports science manager to high-performance manager. And I added another aspect to my role, which was how best could we educate players. Coaches are often ex-sportsmen, and they don't necessarily have any understanding about the things that go into being a coach. A lot of them were just great players, and they don't have an education background, they don't have a teaching background, they don't understand man management, they don't have any psychological background, they don't know a lot necessarily about coaching. But we had this view, they're going to be a good coach because probably they're a good player, and they did a good PowerPoint presentation when we met them, and they had a good vision. Bush was different. He wanted to know a lot about developing players, and it was a really important change in the club. Consequently, in 2006, we were premiers again. Won the premiership after being in the grand final in 2005 and losing by 4 points. We played in one of the great all-time grand finals and won by 1 point. That was sensational. So between 2002 and 2007, we played in every finals again. So since 1990 to 2007, we only missed the finals twice. And in that time, played in 4 grand finals and won 3 premierships, which is a terrific record. And I'm grateful to have been in the club during that period. GPS was now the go-to tool in the AFL, and we were one of the wealthier clubs in 2006. We had 6 units, 6 of them. And we were bagged a bit for spending a lot of money on it, because some places only had 2, so we had 6. We now embrace sports code, which is the package now that gets most sporting teams use, and all our stats came from champion data, and we had to get rid of our statisticians, which was a sad thing that had been with us a long time, but we didn't need them. So our personal statisticians, after all this time, were made redundant. And now we started looking at this fantastic stuff between training load, game performance and injury. And really, in my mind, this was the start of the sports data explosion, as I recall it, around 2006, 2007. Mainly because of the onset of champion data and stats, and also GPS. So we had a wealth of data, and once again, we had no idea exactly what to do with it. We just had a lot of it, and they looked pretty good. So it was from that point that we really started deep analysis. So this is what the initial GPS stuff looked like when we first did it. A couple of names you might know over here from our playing group. Daniel Kerr, who makes the press quite a lot in Western Australia. And I'll talk a little bit about David Wirapunda in a moment. And we would do every training session, get the group average and have a look at where they were in the training zones. And for all those that deal with GPS, you'd be well familiar with this sort of stuff. So this was a unit at the time. David Wirapunda here. This is at the MCG, the captain's run prior to the 2006 grand final. Now, David Wirapunda had missed the preliminary final the week before with a hamstring strain, and we decided that we were going to play with a strategy that we hadn't used all year, and in fact it wasn't part of John Worsfold's repertoire out of his toolbox. We call it, at West Coast we say you've got a toolbox of strategies. Depending who your oppo is, depending how the game's unfolding, you pull out a different tool out of the toolbox and you use that. So we were going to use a strategy we hadn't used before, which was called a +1 or an extra man in defence. And Wirapunda was going to be our player to do it. We needed him to play and we weren't sure. So this is an example where the GPS was unbelievably useful. So we trained in the captain's run the day before the game. We made Wira wear the GPS unit and we asked him to actually do some runs flat out. And we needed the data. We had to know, was he fit to play? And so we all scurried off after the captain's run. We downloaded the GPS straight away and we could see that he'd run at about 30k an hour, and for David Wirapunda that was nearly flat out, right? So that was as good as we got, and we went into the game with a bit of confidence. We had some objective data. So instead of me standing there saying, look, he's running fast, we're able to actually say, yeah, he is running fast. And so David played, the game started, we played with a +1. We really did catch Sydney on the hop. We dominated the first half, and the second half was sort of Sydney coming back, hanging on. We were able to get up and win by a point. And to this day, when I've spoken at a couple of conferences on GPS, it was a really wonderful use of GPS, and this was the end result. Now, it was a sensational little piece of data. Some interesting characters in this photo. Darren Glass, our captain, and just recently retired last year. Our wonderful captain. Bo Waters recently retired last year and has had a career of multiple injuries, sadly. This guy here, Sam Butler, is still playing for us and he's the last remaining player from the 2005-2006 Premiership. David Wirapunda, who I mentioned. I'm just going to mention this guy because no one will know him. And his name's Rowan Jones. Now, Rowan Jones was named the best player by Chris Judd that he's ever played with. And not many people would know that because Rowan Jones was the guy that was in the packs belting people, I mean making pathways for Chris Judd. And Chris Judd knew it. And Chris has often said that one of the abilities that he had, obviously, was to break lines and accelerate. And if it wasn't for Rowan Jones, he would never have got the chance. And of course, when he went to Carlton, he was older and he wasn't the same player, but he didn't have Rowan Jones. And it's an interesting indictment on what sport's like. But that's why it's a beautiful thing, because it's a team sport. And Rowan's part of that team. Two characters, Ben Cousins, who most people would know, and a guy I'll mention a bit later on, Daniel Chick, who a few people might know. So it was an interesting team. So 2015, we understand now that we don't have any idea who the Prime Minister will be, because it'll be a revolving door and it'll just be who rolls up on the day or who happened to not be at the meeting at night. Again, I have absolutely no idea, not only the song, but who the hell are these people? So I'll leave it to the younger people for that. Minky's still going, so she's 15. A great job. 44 on the list. We now have 40 full-time staff in our football department. 40 full-time staff in the football department. It's a phenomenal number. We have 6 full-time recruiting people, 3 physios, 4 strength and conditioning staff, 2 sports scientists, high performance manager, thankfully still, and then coaches by the dozen. And those that follow footy, we're back in the grand final again this current year, and we were flogged. So what's 2015 look like? Well, we're embedded in SMARTABASE, I can tell you that much. Of our 40 full-time staff, we have 1 staff member who is nearly just full-time SMARTABASE, a guy called Brent Rogalski, who has done also a wonderful research paper that's cited quite often about workload and injury. And so we use SMARTABASE for everything. I was telling the guys this morning, we've just added all our recruiting data to it. So all the under-18s, all the under-16s, all their data goes through SMARTABASE now. And we use it in a marvellous way. I ask the questions and the guys come up with the answers, and then they go, Glenn, that was a dumb question. So I'll re-ask the question and then we'll try and sift to the bottom of what it is that myself or the coaching staff want to have a look at. What is it we need to look at? And then it's my job and a couple other guys to convince the coaches based on the data, the wonderful stuff that comes up out of SMARTABASE. So we look at injuries. I'm glad to see Ben Raysmith there because you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Injuries kill you, right? There's so much data, there's so much research now about the relationship between the number of players you have available and success. And it's not about AFL. This is research from a whole range of different sports. And at the end of the day, you need your best players out there. So we spend a lot of time now looking at injuries and how we can prevent our players being injured. So every training session we go through this injury risk assessment. Red's bad, green's good. And we have all our risk factors up here that we pile into a spreadsheet. We have our players down here and we go through each player and we work out at that particular time what do we think the risk is for that player, and then we'll adapt training accordingly each training session. We can't do that without all the data collected and presented in a really easy to read fashion, because we've got 44 players on our list. We've got 4 training sessions a week. We can't be spending hours and hours and hours poring over every player. So the data collection and the way that we review it is critical to our time efficiency. Over here we've been able to collate what we believe is the average risk for each player in a numerical score, and then we'll go ahead and determine what we think that player can do for training. This is our screening stuff. We do exactly the same thing to determine what we believe is their fixed or modifiable risk, because if it's fixed, age, previous injury history, in some cases their nationality. We can't do a lot about it, so some players come with enormous fixed risk, but modifiable risk we're able to do something about, and then on a daily basis we look at variable risk. So we're able to get a snapshot here of some of the things that we believe are important that we can change and adapt as the season goes on. All our fitness data is put in this way, obviously using GPS stuff. So this is where I come back to a little bit about to learning and the way we process. So in trying to get a high performance environment, we follow a model of skill acquisition. by two New Zealand guys called Dreyfus. It's called the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition, and it's the pathway from going from novice to expert. So it's novice, advanced, beginner, competent, proficient, expert. So all of our data is graded in that respect. We need uniformity in our data. So no matter how we view people, they're either an expert, they're a novice, they're competent, they're proficient. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because one of the most important parts, I believe, in data is that you can't have one part of your department operating in one way and another department in the other, and you're trying to tell the coaches. So we follow the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition. So if you're an expert or elite, these would be the sort of scores we would expect: above average, competent, below average, and poor. And we know where people sit on the scale of skill acquisition. And that's uniform across all our data. This is our players' game analysis. So the same thing, same consistency, novice to expert. So a novice would run less than 121 metres per minute for his position, and an expert's more than 142. So that's our benchmarks. Then we have our raw data, the actual figures, and then it's converted into our Dreyfus model, so that we're just able to say, look, he's elite, he's competent, he's etc., etc. And we get this player's last 4 games, the AFL average, the waffle average. And what it does is it enables us to work out what to work on. Because if you're elite, we don't train it. We need to know what the player is novice at, because that's the thing they have to improve. So we've got to identify it. We're going to say, for him to be an AFL player, he's a novice at this, he's a novice at that, he's an expert at that. Don't train him. Players only have a limited amount of time they can work. We say you've got a bottle of water and you can only fill the water bottle up so much. You can't keep pouring water into the bottle because you'll bust the bottle. So we have to be really clear on what's going to make a great AFL player. So, where to now? So that's where we're at now. So, these are my philosophies, my paradigm on what I believe is a high-performance manager drawing on 20 years in the sport. So I feel I've got some PPK to be able to comment on what I think is important and where we go. You have to understand, and this was done at a presentation by Dr. Stewart Morgan at the AIS, so I've just taken some of the data from that. Where we are in terms of data and technology, we are swamped with it. Swamped in a world of technology. And all we need is a guy to be able to mark the bloody ball, hang on to it, and kick it to a teammate. And do it as many times as you can until it's up to that pointy end, and put it through the 2 biggest white sticks you can see. And if you don't mind, can you do it at least 13 times in a game? Because that'll win you a lot of games. But have a look where we are with data and the way we collect it. So we've got layers of complexity. 50 billion different devices in the world to collect data. This is a beauty. This is camera production. The number of cameras that are produced to film. What an exponential growth. Look at this. From analog cameras up to mirrorless cameras up here. Millions of things. We're going to add a drone. We're going to film something else. We're going to film from above now. So now we've got 3 cameras filming around the ground, and now we're going to have a drone. To get the ball, mark it, kick it to a teammate, get up the pointy end of the ground, kick it between the 2 white sticks and do it more than 13 times. Now what if we had smartphones? Bloody hell. We have got a lot of stuff floating around. So where to now? Boy, do you people have some power. What about bytes of data? I think this is fantastic. This is just part of the FBI. Don't worry about data in the world. This is data from the FBI. Down here is a megabyte, then a gigabyte, a terabyte, a petabyte, an exabyte, a brontobyte, 10 with 27 noughts after it. Bytes of data. And somehow that's got to get into SMARTABASE. The point is, where to now is we've got a lot of stuff we've got to sift through. We've got a lot of stuff. And so my question is this. What's significant? We have to decide where to in the future. We have to decide what's significant now. I'm not saying we shouldn't collect data, but our skill will be saying this is important. We could get this 1,500 kilograms max is approaching you at this speed. So bloody what? It's this that we need. That's significance. Watch out. It tells us what to do. That's where we're at. We need to understand, of all the things that we collect now, what has to be thrown out. What doesn't matter. The great thing that I see with our staff is, and we've gone through this a number of times, is you don't have to look busy to keep your job. We don't need you to be busy. And we don't need you to be finding things to justify your position. What we do need is you say to us, if you do this, this guy will get injured. That's what we need. You don't have to worry about a lot of the other stuff. There's a difference between nice to know and need to know. And where to now is need to know. And that's where I think we need to head. What do we need to know? And then the guy that can put it into coach speak is going to be the most important person. How do you take what we need to know and explain it to the coach? Because the coach is not interested necessarily in the data. Yeah, Colin would go around the boundary 80% of the times and they'll do 50 more short kicks than anyone else in the competition. Give it to the coach. And quite rightly, he says, and? He wants to know what to do with it. The person that I think will get employed next is the person that can take the data, who understands the sport that they work in and can put it into coach speak and give the coach the direction other than just the data. So that's the first point that I would need to make, is we need that. Now, it doesn't mean you need to be an ex-sportsman. You need to be able to translate it for the coach, all that data. We should never, ever forget that sport is a combination of art and science. It is not science. It is not data. There is an art to coaching and there is an art to success. We should never forget that. Coaches are artists. So our job, and I see it in the future, is that we collect the colours and put the things on the palette for the coach. That's our job. And we might put a bit of yellow there because he probably needs to see that. And we might put a bit of red. And it's important to have these colours on the palette for the coach. But what we should never forget, and this is my great concern about data and data analysis and sports scientists and exercise physiologists, is that he's got to paint on the canvas and he uses the colours. You don't. I don't. He does. He's an artist. And if he wants to do an abstract thing on the canvas that none of us understand, that's his right, because he's the coach. And I'll tell you now, he'll get sacked before any of us do. So we have to give him the colours. And we can probably draw a shade of charcoal on the canvas for him, but you can never forget that he's the guy that actually has to paint it. And your job, my job, is to make him look bloody good. Our job is to bathe in his reflected glory. Our job is to make the coach look good and the team successful. That's where I think we need to go. And I have a concern that with all the data, we're starting to become a self-fulfilling prophecy that data is everything. And it's not. Because we'll keep churning it out and he'll keep losing his job. So our job is to keep him in his job. Unless he's a dud. But our job, and if he keeps painting abstracts, the board of directors will say, we don't like this painting. But we've got to help. Not just be data analysts and do stuff for the sake of it. There's no doubt this is the path next. Neural networks and data modelling. And I believe it's fair to say, the introduction of Spotfire is taking that pathway. So we have the data, and now we'll predict what's going to happen. If we keep doing this, we're predicting it. We predict. So neural networks is that pathway. And I think that's definitely the next step. Building decision trees, having these neural networks, having accuracy, working it all out. What's the probability? What's likely to happen next? If you do this extra sprint, the possibility is 80% of the time you'll tear your hammy. Don't do it. I really feel that's the next step. We're already in it. I'm speaking to those that understand it. But we really have to grasp it, because the reason we have to grasp it is we can't come out with this. We can't have this as the outcome. We can't have, if you're more efficient offensively and you're better defensively and you block some shots and get more assists, you'll win the game. Bloody hell, we know that. That's good. And thanks for that modelling. And maybe we didn't know about block shots. But the point is, how? You've just put the colours on the palette and he understands red's a block shot. But we've got to get to the coach speak to work out how to do it. How do we get there? That's the next step. How do we coach this outcome? How do we coach to get 72%? There's the latest research paper out on AFL football, out of all the data and champion data. Look, I think at any one stage in a game, we can get 187 different stats in a game. 187 different stats. There's a lot of stats if you want to have a look at stuff. So there's been a bit of research. The latest paper that's come out has identified two things, the two main things that are the common themes in AFL footy that win games. One of it is ball retention, and the other is goal kicking efficiency, accurately. And I thought, there's a lot of work to come up with that stuff. But it's important. It's important. What we need to know is, how do you make them more accurate at goal? You're more accurate at goal if the ball comes into you in the corridor and having a shot from 30 metres out, not from the boundary line 60 metres out. So how do we do that? And that leads me to this one. This is where I would love to go. The unsexy areas of data. Skill acquisition. Now, we played Hawthorn in the 2015 Grand Final. We backed our physical conditioning. We think we're a good team. They were the oldest team in the comp. We thought, hot day. Good stuff. This is right up our alley. Beaten them in the qualifying final, and we're ready to go. We were smashed. Smashed. Within 15 minutes, we were smashed. And at quarter time, it was going to be uphill. Do you know why? Skill and decision making. They were far better in the unsexy areas of the game. Us sports scientists, stronger, fitter, faster. How about beautiful kicking? So how do we do this? This is where we should go, because this wins games. You can throw a blanket over teams' physical fitness. There's no different. The world is full of strength and conditioning specialists. and fitness coaches and altitude training and heat and strength coaches. Full of them. There's more books written on strength and conditioning probably than anything else. What about skill acquisition? Do you know what? It's hard. It's really hard. Because we spend a lot of time getting data on this sort of stuff. Number of forward passes, accuracy, go around the boundary, do all that. Yeah, that's great. Been there, done that now. That's not the future. The future's not here either. That's, in my opinion, that will define sporting teams. Beautiful skill. This. How do we move a person from novice to expert? What data do we need? How do we measure it? How do we track it? How do we work out the volume of kicks? How do we know that's the right volume? How are we going to assess that? How are we going to assess the communication that goes into that coaching? That's the area we need to move into. That's where we need to be smart. Doing that, and decision making, and using our brains, and mental toughness, and the mental side of the game. We need unbelievably good data on that. We need smart people who can come up with ways to assess it, to collect it, to look at it, to train it and see that we're training it. That is where I think we need to go. You don't have to agree. It's my paradigm. I might be out on a limb. But from what I observe, they're the defining things in sport. And in this room are no doubt some of the most intelligent people operating in sport. And it's a challenge, and that's where I would say the challenge needs to be. So, I love this quote. The late Yogi Berra. Prediction's difficult, especially when you're trying to predict about the future. I don't know where we go next. I'm delighted that we've been able to be with SMARTABASE and with Fusion Sport. We started, in fact, way back with Smart Speed, the training at the gates, the speed gates, and that's how I first got involved. And it's been a real good pathway to this point, and there's plenty of exciting things ahead. So I think they're the challenges that we face. So look, I want to finish just by thanking a couple of people. So I'll do this first. So I need to acknowledge the guys that we work with. Jared Heeseman, who's our sports science coordinator, he's the one that does all our answers to my questions. He puts it all together, and he has been leading the club for some considerable time in research. And those of you may have crossed Brent Rogalski. He was here last year. He's our SMARTABASE guy, our go-to guy that creates the forms and does the production. And he's really good. And I need to thank them because they've done a lot of stuff. Thanks very much. I hope that's been a little journey through time, and I'll just finish with this. And I'm really happy to answer any questions. I hope it's been worthwhile listening to me.